Hello, my name is Claire Schneider, and I'm a volunteer with ENGin. In my work as an ESL instructor, I frequently work with students on fluency. So in this video, I'd like to share two of my favorite techniques. One will be really brief, and the second one will take up the bulk of this video. So I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen so that you can see some slides that I prepared. So the first one, as I mentioned, is very brief, and actually we can just go right to it. And that is, you can get students to repeat a story or something that's happened to them a few times in rapid succession. This is especially useful if you don't have a lot of time. So for instance, if they want to practice the past tense or they want to practice speaking about a certain topic, you can have them tell you the same story 3 times. And it's amazing how fast they improve. And as well as their fluency improving, they also develop confidence with this method. And then if the student says, well, I can't practice this without you, you can say, well, actually, you can. You can speak to your pet, they can speak to themselves. It all helps develop their fluency over time. So moving to the second technique I wanted to tell you about, this is my absolute favorite one, but it does take a little more time. And it's called duet reading. And that's because it's a process where you are going to read with the student. So first of all, you need to find a short reading that is level appropriate. Secondly, make sure you, if you're recording, or the student, if they're recording, has a recording app handy and ready to go. And third, you need to have a pen and piece of paper ready if you're using a hard copy of the self-assessment. Otherwise, it can be done virtually just by reading the form, which I will show you. So those are the 3 things you need to do to prepare for this activity. Now, this slide has a lot of information, but it contains a summary of each step. And if we go through it step by step, you'll have a clear record and a clear understanding of what this might look like. So to begin with, the student is going to read aloud from the passage you selected for 1 minute, and you or the student are going to make a recording. After that, the student conducts a self-assessment using this. So they're going to rate themselves between numbers 1 and 5 on these metrics: speed, pronunciation, comprehension, and overall fluency. Comprehension is not really part of this activity, but it is interesting to see how students, just by repeating the same passage several times, develop their comprehension of the passage as well. So now let's go back to the second step. And that is the second step is the self-assessment. The third step is when you now read with the student the same passage 3 times aloud. So wherever the student stopped after a minute, that's what you're going to read each time. And you'll do it 3 times. The first time will be a little slower, second time a little faster, and the third time should be normal speed. Then moving on to number 4, the student then reads the same passage again that he or she read in number 1 aloud. And again, a recording is made of that reading. So they don't necessarily read for a minute. They read until they reach the point where they stopped in number 1. Usually it's less time than in the beginning because they've gotten faster. Then after they do this, you move on to step number 5. And that is when the student repeats the self-assessment and records how they think they did. So as an instructor or as a volunteer teacher or tutor, we don't need to do anything. We just give them this again. They respond by circling or writing down the numbers. And then afterwards, you can talk about, sort of reflect on how they did. But it's best to ask the student first for their impressions of how they did. And typically, this is what happens. They almost always get faster, and the numbers tend to shift to the right. So if you look at any of these self-assessments from some of my students, you will see how this generally moves to the right. And also, you'll notice that the time usually is shorter on the final reading. So here it was 1 minute and 8 seconds. It goes down to 52. And so that's pretty consistent with all these students. I'd also like to take a few moments to go over some sites that students can use by themselves or with you. So I'm always trying to encourage students to become independent learners. And there are some amazing sites online now that are free and that students can use with or without guidance once they learn how to use these sites. So I'd like to spend a few moments showing you some of these. The first one is this one, Reading Skills for Today. And over here, the student can select a level. Let's say they choose level 9, and then they just look for a topic that might be interesting to them. So for instance, they might want to click on, let's just look at mental health. And this site is really set up for this activity. So there's even a timer here. So the student can press start and start reading. I'm not going to wait a minute. I just want to show you how to use it. And so they need to remember where they stop after a minute. Make a mental note. So perhaps it's over here somewhere and after the word job, let's say. Then they're going to click on this first reading.
Level 4.0, Good Mental Health, first reading. Read out loud along with me. Do you have good mental health?
Okay, so that's how it starts. The second reading, I'm not going to play it. I'm just going to show you how the time will change. So over here, she's actually going to read the entire script. That's another way you could do it. I usually do a shorter version of this because of time constraints, but of course you might want to do the longer version. So she reads it once and it takes 2 minutes, 52 seconds. Let's look at the second reading.
Second reading.
So you see the time for that reading the whole passage goes down to 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And then the third one is even faster.
Third reading.
You can see it's 2 minutes and 1 second. And so after that, the student can then go ahead and read by themselves again. And the recording at this point, if they're doing it by themselves, is really optional. If they want to really hear themselves, it's a good idea to record. But if they can't really be bothered or they're in a hurry, even just doing this duet reading is a wonderful activity. And they can reflect on how they think they've done over the course of the 3 readings. And then another amazing site that I'd like to show you is this one. So this is another free site. There is a paid version of this, but they don't need to do that. They just need to go to the main site, click on free lessons, and choose a topic. So let's say they decide they'd like to read this one, Fighting for the Amazon. So this one is structured a little differently, but it's the same idea. So there's a slow version that they can use to read with the reader. There's a normal version and there's a fast version. For some of these readings, I find the fast version gets almost a little too fast, but that's just up to you, depending on what you think and depending on how the student would like to practice. I actually have noticed an advantage sometimes for students to practice faster than we would normally read, because then they slow down at the end slightly and do their normal speed of reading and record it, and it sounds, they become actually very proficient doing that as well. So that's just another option. Another special thing on this site is that they can choose a language. If they're stuck on a word, they don't know what it means, there's some ways to go over vocabulary on this site, and they can have the words automatically translated into their language. So in this case, I left it on Ukrainian for obvious reasons. But if you're using this site with someone who has a different native language, you can change this. So if we go to the normal speed, let's just listen to that for a second.
DeepEnglish.com. More than 20 men hired by an oil company hacked through.
All right, so 3 minutes and 7 seconds. And you can see this one, the final one goes down to 2 minutes and 31 seconds. So this is really a wonderful site. Students love the content on this site. They find it very engaging. And of course, you could use it for other activities where they could tell you a summary of it later. You could use it as a fluency technique like the number one that we talked about, where they are just repeating their summary a few times. And they could also incorporate new vocabulary that they come across. But for the purposes of just developing fluency, where they really get a sense of being able to read fluently and what that might be like when they speak fluently, you can just do the duet reading. So I encourage you to spend a little time on some of these sites so that you can find your favorite one and use it with the students. So I hope that you enjoyed hearing these tips, and I wish you all the best with practicing fluency with your students or your buddies, as we refer to them at ENGin. Bye for now.